So we're really delighted to be here because what we want to do in the next hour is really come down to the level of the classroom and teacher and student interaction to ask the question, what can teachers do to help to bring out talents that are in our students, but that often wither away and never manifest themselves because of the way they're taught. I've been working with schools since 1980, with teachers in schools, and I really come to feel that most students are really talented students, but their talents are hidden. And often, their talents don't come out because of the kind of interaction there is in classrooms between teachers and students and students and students. And we've heard something about that already today. Well, when I say I've been working since 1980, I've been working with teachers in schools to try to reverse that. And I just want to quote a teacher who came to me about 6 months ago from a school in Las Palmas in Mallorca, and who said to me, I never thought my students could ever do anything like this. And that was not the only time I've heard that, but it really made me feel very good because it reinforced the idea that a lot of the techniques that we were trying to help students to adopt, to help teachers adopt and use with their students in classrooms were really working. And today, we've invited two groups of educators and a wonderful student, okay, Karine. We've invited Socorro and Lola and Aurea and Sylvia from La Asuncion in Cáceres and from Lope de Vega School in Benidorm to take over after I say a few words about what thinking-based learning is all about and how it works with students to bring about what I've been talking about. And they're going to tell you what's happened in their schools. And I will say that these two schools are schools that we have certified as thinking-based learning schools. We work with our organization, actually, is not just in the USA, but we have an office in Madrid, and in fact, today, we found out that the last of the procedures to turn us into an official corporation in Spain so that we can offer much more to teachers in schools. We found out that that just happened. So we feel pretty good about that. Okay, but we work with teachers in school and schools, and we really try to help first the teachers make various kinds of changes in their classrooms that aren't too difficult, okay, but that in a sense contradict what they learned when they learned how to be teachers. For example, there are changes that involve backing away from treating memory and rote learning as the only vehicle for student learning and understanding, and substituting many other things, but mostly a focus on developing important thinking skills, critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, that even 3- and 4-year-old students can start to develop, that can then be turned on to a focus on the content curriculum in a way that brings out all of those things that I had wished were brought out way back in the 1980s when I started working with schools. And we're going to hear from them about how that happens. But I want to say a few words first, and I guess I need my clicker so that we can get rid of me and put that up there. And I just want you to note the web address, and if you want to find out much more about the kinds of things you're hearing about this evening, you can go to that website and you'll find all that out. And if you have any comments or questions for me, that's my email address. You know, I used to say to people in conferences like this, if you have any questions or comments, you can call me at any time of the day or night. I'm there for you, and I'll try to answer your questions. Okay, and what I didn't realize, I didn't really think about, was the time difference between Spain and the USA. Okay, so I stopped saying that. Okay, but you can certainly email me. So let's start. And we're going to take a little journey, okay, and an interesting one. And we're going to start with this. And most of you know what this is. This is Machu Picchu, okay, in Peru. Anybody been there? Few people. Okay, but we all know about Machu Picchu, one of the gems of the Inca civilization, a civilization that began in the 13th century and actually continued until the Spaniards, of all people, okay, demolished it, okay, or at least removed its power in the 16th century. It's a civilization that flourished, that became the greatest civilization in South America. Amazing. So, what's this? Well, this is a little graphic organizer, okay? And what it's about is the Inca civilization. And these students have focused on the different components of Inca civilization. And unlike a lot of classrooms, the teacher didn't stop there, didn't just ask them what the different components are and then go on to something else, but prompted them to start to think about what these different components do, what their function is in a civilization. And that's a version of, you know, trying to figure out what the function of parts are in our computer, or parts of our washing machines, or parts of our government. So we don't just know what they're called, but we understand what they do, how they function. And the goal of this was to help students to be able to figure out and articulate how the components of this civilization work together in a way that kept it going and flourishing for over 300 years. How did that happen? Okay, now this appeared in a fair, a thinking-based learning fair at a school in Lima, Peru, Colegio Cacharinas, a school that day and that afternoon was being certified as a TBL school, thinking-based learning school. We had been working with them for 3 years, okay, and the results were absolutely wonderful. And they decided in the morning to have all of the teachers and their students put up displays from their classrooms of how learning was happening in their classrooms now. And this represents one of the displays, okay? And it was a display that was described not by the teachers when visitors came and looked at it, but by the students. In fact, that was the character of all of the displays. All of these displays with material from pre-K instruction, ages 3 and 4, all the way up through 18-year-old upper-level baccalaureate students. They were all there, and it was the students who explained to the parents who had come to visit the school and see what was going on in these classrooms. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, that's wonderful. And now these students don't just know, what they've really uncovered about Inca civilization, but they can also explain the process, how the students actually started with a particular kind of thinking, learned how to do it well, and then applied it to something, Inca civilization, in a way that led to insights that they developed that students rarely ever get exposed to, even in the most sophisticated textbooks. And humility also. Well, she doesn't know about that. Maybe her partner does. And there's another little girl there too, okay, who works with them, who might be able to fill in. And that's another aspect of all of this. These are not individual students who are talking about what they achieved. These are students in teams, because that's the way they work on learning in these classrooms. Okay, and parents, just to give you a sense of what this was like. They set this up in a gymnasium, okay? And it was the students who explained how all this worked to the parents. Even these little kids, okay? What they did was they constructed models of things that they know about out of other things that are not used to construct models. For example, this is just a crumpled piece of paper. These are CDs together with lollipop sticks to make a model of a bicycle. And so these students have actually started to learn some creative thinking skills. And they're going to tell anybody that asks them how they did that. Amazing. Okay. Now, we go back, because that's an end result, and it represents every classroom in this school. And how did it all start? Well, I've spoken here before, and if you've come again, okay, you're going to hear some of the things I've said before, but I want to go back to them, because at the beginning of the 21st century, that's when a lot of people started really making noise about the need to change things in education. And one of the big proposals was, well, we can't base learning on memory only. And in fact, aside from that, we need to help students learn to do good thinking, to think well. So what we need to do is elevate thinking to a primary role in the curriculum. Make it one of the important domains of the content that students need to focus on in their learning. And now what does that mean? That means they're not going to learn about thinking. Okay, the idea is to help them develop skill at thinking, so that the kind of thinking they do every day, which usually is not very good because they've never learned about how to do it well, can be done much better and with great skill. And I'll show you some examples of that. But people often say to me, why teach thinking? Doesn't everybody think? And of course, everybody does think, but they usually don't think too well, okay? Whoa, that looks like a wonderful car. I've been shopping around for an automobile. I like the color, okay? Like the name, I'm going to buy it, okay? No questions about, are there any disadvantages to this car? How comfortable is it? No. And that's a kind of model of the way a lot of people make decisions, even when they buy breakfast cereal. Looks good. But how many people stop and ask, whoa, how much sugar is in this breakfast cereal? They don't tell you that, okay? What about food additives? What about artificial color? Well, and yet many people buy it because it looks good and it sounds good. And so do students. So how can we make this better? Even though everybody thinks, not everybody thinks as carefully and as well as they could. So how can we help them think with more skill, think better? That's the question. And the answer has been that the kinds of thinking that people do every day are what we need to focus on. We don't have to go into the upper domain of logic and arguments. Okay, we're talking about the thinking everybody does every day of their lives. How can we make that better? How can we help them to make it better? And the answer has been, teach them thinking skills. And you've all heard that. And maybe you've seen some lists of thinking skills. But we have to be careful, because what is a thinking skill? Well, I like to think of these kinds of skills the way we think about athletics, like we saw in the last videos. Okay, these swimmers were practicing skill at swimming. But what does that mean? What is a thinking skill? What were they doing? Well, they were swimming well. They were swimming with skill. When they first started swimming, when they were kids, they couldn't swim very well, and they weren't exhibiting much skill. But they've learned how to stroke, how to breathe, how to kick, so that some of them, in fact, will advance and become champion swimmers. Okay, so it's doing something with skill. That's what we're after. How can we help people do good decision making? Okay, when they make predictions, not just guess about the future, but make predictions that they have some confidence in, that are well supported, that they have good reason to think are probably going to happen. How can we help students do that? Well, that's the issue. Okay, so it's thinking with skill that we're after. How can we do it? Well, I just put this in here. I was going to take it out because it's a lot of words, but I just want to show you that when you think about it, there are a lot of different kinds of thinking, like classifying. There's not just decision making, there's problem solving, predicting, trying to figure out what caused something to happen, even comparing and contrasting. Okay, trying to come up with new original ideas. Okay, and those fall into different categories: creative thinking, analysis, critical thinking. A big one is determining the reliability of sources of information, so that when you get information on the internet or from somebody, okay, you can have some confidence that it's likely to be good information. Okay? Now, actually, I'm going to resist, but when I thought about what I was going to say here, I thought, this is the time to make a joke about Donald Trump, okay? Because he always does that. He always checks his facts, right? Okay. In fact, I thought, you know, there's a big thing about NBC and fake news, okay? And I wanted to go to NBC and say, hey, you should say to Donald Trump, what about the fake facts that you give us? Do you ever check their reliability? Well, whether he does or not, we want our kids, the kids that we teach, to learn to do that. So that when they go to the internet to get information, they don't just press on a link and go and copy whatever they see. Okay, what they do is they try to figure out, they have to answer some questions, get some information to judge whether the source is likely to be reliable. Very important critical thinking skill. And of course, action-focused thinking decision-making and problem-solving. Well, let's look at decision-making. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we ask, how can we make decisions with skill? And to me, that means the way students usually interpret it, what questions do we need to ask and answer before we come to some conclusion, we decide what the best thing to do is? And usually, when teachers do this with students, they show them an example like this and they ask, what do we need to find out? What questions do we need to ask and answer to decide which is the best road to take? You're going to your grandmother's birthday party. You have to be there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And you have this fork in the road, which is the best one. Don't just guess. What do we need to ask and answer? And when they do that, okay, it's teachers and students interacting, and the students are helping to come up with a strategy, question strategy, that will help them do better thinking in making that kind of decision. And it looks like something like this, although I don't like this because it's me writing down, okay, a kind of summary of what I've heard in classrooms. And usually in classrooms, they use the language of the students. A teacher adds some things, okay, but it says the same thing, but it sounds a little different. But this is a good one. They said we need to ask and answer these questions carefully before we make a decision. Actually, they left something out because students who have used this technique, they say, well, we have to be careful. When we ask what are the consequences of the different things we can do, okay, we have to make sure we think about both the positive and the negative ones. It's easy, okay, because we've developed this habit responding to advertising to just ask, what are the good things that are going to happen? Be careful. And they realize that, and they start to do it when they follow this, and they get in the habit. Okay, and that's one of the goals of all of this, is to help students develop and do good, careful thinking, like skillful decision-making, okay, when they need to. And that means not just in school, but in their lives. But still, we're back in school. Here's the thinking strategy that was used about the Incas. Let's not just identify the parts of Inca civilization, but for each part, what would happen if it wasn't there? What would be missing? So when it is there, what does that part do? What does it accomplish? Okay? And students don't work on all of the parts they identify. They work in groups on specific parts and then put it all together. Okay? So let's take a look at classrooms now, and let's go back to decision making. Because the second thing we want to help students to do is learn to use these kinds of thinking when they're engaging with the content curriculum. And what does that mean? Well, they have to find places where it's appropriate to try to engage in good decision making. For example, okay, well, they learn about energy sources, okay, in science, but rarely in their textbooks do the textbook writers ever say, what's the best one for your region? Okay, but the teacher can say that, can say, now let's try to make a decision about what you would recommend. I mean, you see these windmills and solar panels all over. Okay, what's the best one for our region? And it may be different from region to region. In Saudi Arabia, okay, the windmills aren't going to help very much, okay, but solar panels may. Well, so for this region, that means, okay, in order to engage in this kind of thinking, they have to actually go and get some information. Okay, whoa. But you'll see that in a few minutes. Napoleon, they're studying history. Well, Napoleon had to make a lot of decisions. Some of them were good ones, some of them were terrible. You become Napoleon, okay, and you've been challenged by Wellington to a battle on the fields of Waterloo. But you got some problems with your armed forces now. What are you going to do? Think it through. That means you have to know things about the period, okay, make a good decision, write a letter to Napoleon recommending what you think the best thing to do is and why. Okay, now this is a book that was written in the U.S., Charlotte's Web, translated into Spanish, little girl and her father, but most of the time it's about animals, and Charlotte is a spider who has a web. But there are decisions that these characters have to make in this book, and some of them are good ones, some of them aren't. Well, you become Fern, the little girl, and your challenge, your father is going to go and kill an animal because it was a runt. It was born small. It's a pig. And you think, well, wait a minute. Just because it's small, you're going to kill it? Well, what are you going to do? Or you're the father. Your daughter has challenged you. What would you do? And you're not trying to guess at what's going to happen in the story. You're trying to figure out what, given the circumstances, is the best thing to do. Okay? So become a character in a story. Or even little kids. Okay? Well, there's a simpler organizer, a simple strategy, and let's apply it to this little elephant who gets into trouble, has to make a lot of decisions, and then he's surrounded by hunters. What should he do? You become the elephant. Of course, your little kids, you're basing this on your experience, etc. Well, in the classroom, what happens? And I'm going to go through these things pretty quickly. First, students are working together. Thinking is a social phenomenon, and we have to help students learn how to think together and learn together. They're not individuals, they don't compete, okay? They work together in teams. And the teacher lets them, gives them time to think, okay? And they bond together and work together, okay? This is a group of kids. This is a black African kid, and this is actually a high ability student working together in the same group, trying to work on an issue using one of these thinking skills. And I snuck up and got this picture in this classroom of these kids all working together so that the recorder can record something that represents, okay, their collective thinking. Great, okay? And make the thinking visible and explicit. Don't just talk about it, but here's a strategy, post it on the wall. Let's think about the energy example, and let's just talk about what the consequences are going to be, but let's write it down. Let's use some graphic organizers here, which are great organizing tools to help students organize their thinking. And you know that because you use your day timer, okay, that helps you organize your thinking about what you're going to do during the day, et cetera, et cetera. So what options? That's one of the big questions. So let's list options, and then let's list factors to think about. And this comes from the students, okay? This is not just from any one group. This is a mixture. And what you should try to find out about an option to decide whether it's a good one. Now, I ask teachers who do this, where does this come from? Have the students gone out and done some research? Have they gone to the internet to try to find out what you need to find out about an energy source? No. It's all there in their heads. And that, to me, is a key to really addressing this question about high ability students. Because one of the important techniques that high ability students use and have mastered, maybe are born with, is their ability to connect things that they already know with things that they're experiencing now. Okay, so that they actually learn from other experiences that they've had. In fact, the brain is a wonderful organ, not just to control our bodies, but in this head right here, there are things that I learned when I was 6 years old. Now, maybe they're not very valuable anymore, but maybe they are. And I should be able to get at them and tap them and use them to expand, okay, my knowledge and my ideas about what I can do with things in the world, okay? And in TBL, that's a characteristic of the kind of learning that is promoted. Students working together, they use a bigger graphic organizer. They're going to put the factors here, okay, and the options on the side, and then they have to get information. So the teacher says, take a couple of days, okay, in your teams. Your team will work on solar, you'll work on wind, and go out and find out about the cost, okay, safety, okay, find out about accessibility, etc. Fantastic. And what do? Each works on a separate, okay, option, and they fill in the information they get. Star means it's very important. Give it a little more weight, pro and con, and they put this all together. Now, you can't read this, and it doesn't matter, because I want you to have the experience I did when I first saw it. I said, my God, look at how much these students have learned in 2 days about energy sources that is never in their textbooks, okay? And that is going to help them think about which of these is the best one for their region. Fantastic, okay? So you decide which option is best, and you should be able to explain why, okay? And when all this happens, students, don't just keep it to yourself and your groups, report to the whole class, because maybe one of the other groups have discovered something that you missed and that you can use, okay? We want the classroom, a whole classroom, to be a thinking classroom in which the students treat each other equally, even though some of them have more abilities than others, okay? And they work together like we do in the world. This student, this is from a school in the Bronx in New York, this student was absolutely wonderful in explaining why a problem solving, a solution, wasn't going to work. Incredible. And little kids too. Graphic organizers, they'll explain. Even special needs kids. I had been, this classroom in Chile now, I've been in this classroom many times, and I had never, ever seen these kids smile. And look at how proud they are, which is something else that comes with all of this. Okay, so here we have a change from passivity, students hate it, they do what they can to get out of school as fast as they can, to active classrooms and some samples. And I want to end with a little video that was made by students in Colegio Aisha. It's a school on Mallorca, okay, after they had started learning these thinking skills, okay? So let's show it. Now we have to click it to get the sound. Can you do it up there? Can you make the sound louder?
Improving our thinking skills. To do so, our teachers are learning in workshops with the famous philosopher Robert Swartz about thinking-based learning, a new approach to teaching where students learn to skillfully compare and contrast, make decisions, solve problems, and many more.
So, the girls in second of bachiller are trying to decide what to apply for next year in college, and most of them are considering more than one degree. The teachers are trying to help them make that decision skillfully. Students will learn to think about options and the consequences in making decisions.
They've got a thinking map, a graphic organizer, and a structured questioning to emphasize options and consequences in this decision making. This can be done individually or in small groups of 3 or 4 members.
Firstly, they have to ask themselves,
What can I do?
and write it down in the graphic organizer. Secondly,
What will happen if I do these things?
with the pros and cons, the following step is to wonder.
Which are good things to do and why?
And finally, a conclusion is drawn where they decide which option is best for themselves. This year in Aisha, we are introducing new ways.
Okay, and that's the end of my part of this presentation. And I hope this gives you some sense of what thinking-based learning is all about.